Good afternoon, Year 2. Today it is a very, very special day and one that if we were in school, we would be doing lots and lots of lovely work with. It's World Book Day, isn't it? And World Book Day is a day that you might remember, and it'll probably be for reception, which was quite a long time ago, where we dress up as our favourite book character and we celebrate the wonderful world of reading and how important reading is. Now, reading can, for some of us, feel a bit of a chore, can't it? I know that. Some of us don't really enjoy reading. And that's probably because you haven't found the right book. When you find a book that you enjoy, reading can be really fun. And I know lots of you in class absolutely adore your reading and work really hard on it. And it's been great seeing lots of your videos of you reading whilst you've been at home. Now, we thought because we can't all be together for World Book Day, we thought it'd be a nice idea if you were to perhaps dress up at home. Now, if you can't dress up at home, if you can't get to any shops or get anything, a good idea might have been, it might be instead, and I've put this on the website, to possibly paint a stone to look like your favorite book character, or decorate an egg to look like your favorite book character, or even draw a paper plate to look like your favorite book character. You could dress up a doll to look like your favorite book character. That's entirely up to you. So if you don't like dressing up, that's fine. If you want to send me any pictures of you dressed up or anything you've done to decorate for World Book Day, then I look forward to reading it. So I've recorded this video today because I want to share a part of a story with you. Now, it's fantastic news, isn't it, that we're going to be coming back to school from the 8th of March. So the week after today, the Monday after today, we'll be back in school, all of us. And that's fantastic news, isn't it? So I'm sure you're all looking forward to it as much as I'm looking forward to seeing you. And I know the children that have been in school with us all along will be very, very excited to have all their classmates back. So I thought I would start reading a story that I really enjoy and that would become our class novel. So when we're all back in school, we'll carry on reading that book as our class novel. Does that sound good? Okay. So I'm going to just introduce this book first of all, and then I'm going to read you some of it, not all of it, maybe a chapter, maybe two chapters, we'll see. Okay. And it's a book by a very famous author, and I'm going to tell you some of the other books he wrote and see if you can guess. He wrote Matilda. He wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He wrote Fantastic Mr. Fox. He wrote The Giraffe, the Pelly and Me. He wrote The Enormous Crocodile. Who do you think it might be? I'll give you a clue. His first name begins with a R. That's right. It's Roald Dahl. Now, Roald Dahl is a very famous author, isn't he? And Roald Dahl sadly isn't alive anymore, but the books he wrote over 20, 30 years ago are still loved by so many children. And I read this book when I was your age. So it's a book that I really enjoy, and I know you will do too. Now, I'm going to read you the blurb, first of all, on the back of this book. Okay, and you can see what it's about. In fact, before I read the blurb, I'm going to show you the front cover. Can you see that front cover? So the book, I'll just hold it up as close as I can. The book is called George's Marvellous Medicine. And it says the author is Roald Dahl and it's illustrated by Quentin Blake. What does illustrated mean? That's right, illustrated means that he drew all the lovely pictures. Okay, what can you see on that front cover? What's happening on it? Zoom in on the picture. What's happening? See, there's a boy there. Who might he be? What do you think his name is? And what's he got? What's he doing? Could he be making something? Do you think it might be going well? So I want you to guess. I want you to predict. Tell someone at home what you think this book is going to be about. And then I'll read you the blurb. Okay? So let's have a look. The blurb is there just to show you the back of the book, isn't it? That tells us a bit about what it's about and it draws you in. So the blurb says, warning, do not try to make George's Marvellous Medicine yourselves at home. It could be dangerous. So that sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? Let's have a look inside. And here is another bit which would probably be a blurb as well. Can you see that there? It says, George Cranky's grandma is a miserable grouch. George really hates that horrid old witchy woman. One Saturday morning, George is in charge of giving Grandma her medicine. So ho, aha, ho hum. George knows exactly what to do. A magic medicine it will be. One that will either cure her completely or blow off the top of her head. Can you see the picture there? George's horrible grandma. George has got his medicine. So do you think maybe he might be making medicine on the front of here for his grandma? Should we read on? So let's have a look. So here's our contents page, and these are normally in information books, aren't they, to tell us where to look for certain information. But this contents page has got our chapters, hasn't it? And each chapter starts on a new page. So if you wanted to read a chapter on brown paint, you might not be able to see this with my rubbish camera. You'd go to page 35. But we're going to start at the beginning, aren't we? Okay. And chapter 1 is called Grandma. I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning. So be a good boy and don't get up to mischief. This was a silly thing to say to a small boy at any time. It immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get up to. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, the mother said. Then out she went, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine. No, Grandma, George said. And just try to behave yourself for once while she's away. Yes, Grandma, George said. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or a sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere, so there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs and hens and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as that grisly old grunion of a grandma. Can you hear the alliteration there? Grisly old grunion of a grandma. What sound do lots of those words begin with? That's like the g sound, don't they? And that makes it sound really good to read, doesn't it? Looking after her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. You can make me a nice cup of tea for a start, Grandma said to George. That'll keep you out of mischief for a few minutes. Yes, Grandma, George said. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was a selfish, grumpy old woman. She had pale brown teeth and a small, puckered up mouth like a dog's bottom. Ooh. How much sugar in your tea today, Grandma? George asked. 1 spoon, she said, and no milk. Most grandmothers are lovely, kind, helpful old ladies, but not this one. She spent all day and every day sitting in her chair by the window, and she was always complaining, grousing, grouching, grumbling, griping about something or other. Can you hear all those get words again? Never once, even on her best days, had she smiled at George and said, Well, how are you this morning, George? Or, why don't you and I have a game of snakes and ladders? Or, how was school today? She didn't seem to care about other people, only about herself. She was a miserable old grouch. Doesn't sound very nice, does she? George went into the kitchen and made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He put 1 spoon of sugar in it and no milk. He stirred the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. It's not sweet enough, she said. Put more sugar in. George took the cup back to the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried it carefully into Grandma. "Where's the saucer?" she said. "I won't have a cup without a saucer." George fetched her a saucer. And you can see there Grandma with her cup of tea that George has brought her, can't you? She's not very grateful, is she, after he's worked so hard to make that for her? She's not being very thankful. "And what about a teaspoon, if you please?" "Stirred it for you, Grandma. I stirred it well." "I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much," she said. "Fetch me a teaspoon." George fetched her a teaspoon. When George's mother or father were home, Grandma never ordered George about like this. It was only when she had him on her own that she began treating him badly. "You know what's the matter with you?" the old woman said, staring at George over the rim of the teacup with those bright, wicked little eyes. "You're growing up too fast. Boys who grow up too fast become stupid and lazy." "But I can't help it if I'm growing fast, Grandma," George said. "Of course you can," she snapped. "Growing's a nasty, childish habit." "But we have to grow, Grandma. If we didn't grow, we'd never be grown-ups." "Rubbish, boy, rubbish," she said. "Look at me. Am I growing? Certainly not." "But you did once, Grandma." "Only very little," the old woman answered. "I gave up growing when I was extremely small, along with all the other nasty childish habits like laziness and disobedience and greed and sloppiness and untidiness and stupidity. You haven't given up any of these things, have you?" "Still only a little boy, Grandma." "You're 8 years old," she snorted. "That's old enough to know better. If you don't stop growing soon, it'll be too late." "Too late for what, Grandma?" "It's ridiculous," she went on. "You're nearly as tall as me already." George took a good look at Grandma. She certainly was a very tiny person. Her legs were so short she had to have a footstool to put her feet on, and her head only came halfway up the back of the armchair. "Daddy says it's fine for a man to be tall," George said. "Don't listen to your daddy," Grandma said. "Listen to me." "Well, how do I stop myself growing?" George asked her. "Eat less chocolate," Grandma said. "Does chocolate make you grow?" "It makes you grow the wrong way," she snapped. "Up instead of down." Grandma sipped some tea, but never took her eyes from the little boy who stood before her. "Never grow up," she said. "Always down." "Yes, Grandma. And stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead." "Cabbage? Oh, no, I don't like cabbage," George said. "It's not what you like or what you don't like," Grandma snapped. "It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage. And if it's got caterpillars in it, so much the better." "Ugh," George said. "Caterpillars give you brains," the old woman said. "Mummy washes them down the sink," George said. There's George, with his grandma being quite unkind to him. She doesn't look very nice, does she? And here he is thinking of the caterpillars on his cabbage. Can you see them there? "Mummy's as stupid as you are," Grandma said. "Cabbage doesn't taste like anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. Slugs too." "Not slugs," George cried out. "I couldn't eat slugs." "Whenever I see a live slug on a piece of lettuce," Grandma said, "I gobble it up quick before it crawls away. Delicious." She squeezed her lips together tight so that her mouth became a tiny wrinkled hole. "Delicious," she said again. "Worms and slugs and beetly bugs. You don't know what's good for you." "You're joking, Grandma." "I never joke," she said. "Beetles are perhaps best of all. They go crunch." "Grandma, that's beastly." The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, she said, you get a beetle inside the stem of a stick of celery. That's what I like. Grandma, how could you? You find all sorts of nice things in sticks of raw celery, the old woman went on. Sometimes it's earwigs. Ugh, not very nice, is it? I don't want to hear about it, cried George. A big fat earwig is very tasty, Grandma said, licking her lips. But you've got to be quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a pair of sharp nippers on its back end. And if it grabs your tongue with those, it never lets go. So you've got to bite the earwig first, chop, chop, before it bites you. George started edging towards the door. He wanted to get as far away as possible from this filthy old woman. You're trying to get away from me, aren't you? She said, pointing a finger straight at George's face. You're trying to get away from Grandma. Little George stood by the door, staring at the old hag in the chair. She stared back. Could it be, George wondered, that she was a witch? He had always thought witches were only in fairy tales, but now he wasn't so sure. Come closer to me, little boy, she said, beckoning him with a horny finger. Come closer to me, and I will tell you secrets. George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either. I know a great many secrets, she said, and suddenly she smiled. It was a thin, icy smile, the kind a snake might make just before it bites you. Come over here to Grandma, and she'll whisper secrets to you. George took a step backwards, edging closer to the door. How do you think George is feeling right now? I think he might be feeling about Grandma. I think he's probably a little bit scared, isn't he? You mustn't be frightened of your old Grandma, she said, smiling that icy smile. George took another step backwards. There she is, and George is trying to back away from her. Some of us, she said, and all at once she was leaning forward in her chair and whispering in a throaty sort of voice George had never heard her use before. Some of us, she said, have magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into wondrous shapes. A tingle of electricity lashed down the length of George's spine. He began to feel frightened. Some of us, the old woman went on, have fire on our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry in the tips of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand straight up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets. George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck to the floor. We know how to make your nails drop off and teeth grow out of your fingers instead. George began to tremble. It was her face that was frightening him most of all, the frosty smile, the brilliant, unblinking eyes. We know how to wake you up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you. Grandma, he cried out, stop! We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other. George made a dive for the door. It doesn't matter how far you run, he heard her say. You won't ever get away. George ran into the kitchen and slammed the door behind him. Do you think Grandma might be a witch? Do you think she's really a witch? Or do you think maybe she's joking with him? What do you think? Okay, so that was chapter 1. And I'm going to just read you chapter 2 because it's only a few pages long. And then when we come in, we're going to carry on reading the story. So chapter 2 is called The Marvellous Plan. George sat himself down at the table in the kitchen. He was shaking a little. Oh, how he hated Grandma. He really hated that horrid old witchy woman. And all of a sudden, he had a tremendous urge to do something about her. Something whopping, something absolutely terrific, a real shocker, a sort of explosion. He wanted to blow away the witchy smell that hung about her in the next room. He may have only been 8 years old, but he was a brave little boy. He was ready to take this old woman on. I'm not going to be frightened by her, he said softly to himself. But he was frightened, and that's why he wanted suddenly to explode her away. Well, not quite away, but he did want to shake the old woman up a bit. Very well then, what should it be? This whopping, terrific exploding shocker for Grandma. He would have liked to put a firework banger under her chair, but he didn't have one. He would have liked to put a long green snake down the back of her dress, but didn't have a long green snake. So there he is thinking of some ideas of what he can do to Grandma. What do you think he should do? What do you think would be a good trick to play on Grandma to frighten her? Very interesting. Okay. He would have liked to put 6 big black rats in the room with her and lock the door, but he didn't have 6 big black rats. As George sat there pondering this interesting problem, his eyes fell upon the bottle of Grandma's brown medicine standing on the sideboard. Rotten stuff it seemed to be. 4 times a day, a large spoonful of it was shoveled into her mouth, and it didn't do her the slightest bit of good. She was always just as horrid after she'd had it as she'd been before. The whole point of medicine, surely, was to make a person better. If it didn't do that, then it was quite useless. So ho, thought George suddenly. Aha, ho hum. I know exactly what I'll do. I shall make her a new medicine, one that is so strong and so fierce and so fantastic it will either cure her completely or blow the top of her head off. I'll make her a magic medicine, a medicine no doctor in the world has ever made before. George looked at the kitchen clock. He said 10:05. There was nearly an hour left before Grandma's next dose was due at 11. Here we go then, cried George, jumping up from the table. A magic medicine it shall be. There's George jumping up from the table to make his medicine. Can you see the clock telling the time? So give me a bug and a jumping flea. Give me 2 snails and lizards 3, and a slimy squiggler from the sea, and the poisonous sting of a bumblebee, and the juice from the fruit of the jujube tree, and the powdered bone of a wombat's knee, and 100 other things as well, each with a rather nasty smell. I'll stir them up, I'll boil them long, a mixture tough, a mixture strong, and then, hey ho, and down it goes, a nice big spoonful, hold your nose. Just gulp it down and have no fear. How do you like it, Granny dear? So that's like a spell, isn't it? Almost like a magic spell. What do you notice about lots of the words in that spell? What do they do? They rhyme, don't they? It's like a poem, isn't it? And there's lots of rhythm to it as well. There's a rhythm, a clap, a beat. Will she go pop? Will she explode? Will she go flying down the road? Will she go poof in a puff of smoke? Start fizzing like a can of Coke? Who knows? Not I. Let's wait and see. I'm glad it's neither you nor me. Oh, Grandma, if you only knew what I have got in store for you. So George is planning to make himself a medicine, isn't he? And he's going to give it to his grandma. And I wonder what she's going to think of that medicine. Do you think she's going to like it? Okay, I'm going to stop the story there. Our next chapter that we'll read when we come back into school is George begins to make the medicine. So hopefully when you do your other tasks today, I know lots of you are going to be designing bookmarks, and I put a link on for a video of how you can make your own monster corner bookmark. Perhaps the winner in our class of the bookmark, we can use it to keep our book on the right page. I hope you enjoyed that year 2. I really enjoyed reading it to you, and I absolutely cannot wait to see you all on Monday. It's going to be great to all be back together, isn't it? So stay safe, have a lovely rest of the day, enjoy your World Book Day activities, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.